Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Sugar Mama's Fireplay podcast. I am Canna Campbell. Today's podcast, we're talking about couples and money. Apparently, up to 30% or 32% of marriages end because of money. And I suspect that number is a lot higher because, let's be realistic, who actually completes a survey when they separate from their partner? Now, today we have Adam Cole, who is a couples financial coach, joining us. And he's going to help, I guess, demystify how we talk about money with our partner, with our other half. How do we tiptoe around certain topics? How do we respect their values? How do we diffuse the arguments with money? And I think this is something that's going to be of high value to everyone, whether you are in a relationship or not. Adam, thank you so much for joining us this morning. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm well. I am really excited about obviously picking your brain. And this is a subject matter I've spoken about on my YouTube channel, and I've done, I think, one podcast about how Tom and I do money. But I love hearing about how other people do money and what works and what keeps the peace, but also what, respects financial well-being, to make sure that you're not just treading water or living on eggshells or just sweeping things under the mat. Like, how do we do money where we're actually growing and strengthening our financial well-being?
Yeah. And I think you probably believe it, but I have clients who make anywhere from under 100,000 US as a household to upwards of $1 million US each year as a household. And none of that means that they don't have any challenges about this issue, right? Yeah. Sometimes the more money you have, there's even more decisions you have to make, and that can be even more stressful.
Well, I always have believed money just magnifies what's already there. So, it's got nothing to do with how much you earn, but what you do with what you earn. Now, just as a bit of a background, you're just not an expert on money. You're actually a lawyer. You're a certified mediator, which is great because you're fantastic at breaking up arguments. And obviously, you're also a former financial planner yourself.
Right.
So you have a background, the legals, the maths, and then, of course, the psychology between couples.
Right. And that's really what led me to do this work, because as you were talking about, this is such a significant issue. It's the number one stressor. A study from a couple of years ago indicated it was the number one predictor of divorce was money arguments. And like you said, it's often named as one of the top reasons for divorces. And who knows how many breakups, by the way. We don't really have good data on unmarried couples, but I am sure it's just as significant there, if maybe not, maybe even more so. And yet there's so little out there that addresses the intersection of these two topics, right? There's content out there like you provide around money and mindset with money and good habits with money and how to structure things. And there's a lot of wonderful content around how to strengthen your relationship, how to communicate effectively, how to build self-awareness, and yet very little that combines the two. To the extent it's even out there, it's like a one-off article here or there or a one-off video here or there, and let alone people actually on the ground helping couples who are either struggling with this, fighting about it, or just they know that there's more they can get out of their money than they are today. And with that background, I decided, you know what? I think I can help people with this.
Even myself as a financial planner, when Tom and I started to talk about money and talk about our dreams and goals, and, we talked about having joint bank accounts, I remember feeling like I was fumbling around in the dark. And, I asked my parents, like, how do you guys do money? And they didn't actually, they've been such a great source of financial inspiration, education, and motivation to me, but they were able to help me work out how Tom and I do money. It was kind of closed off to sharing. So I remember it took us a while. We have a great relationship with money, but I completely agree with you. There's no how-to guidebook out there or to follow step one, step two. So I want to
Well,
pick.
there will be. It's just I'm in the editing process of
Ah,
what hopefully will be that guidebook. But you're right. There's really not much out there.
all right. Well, you need to let us know that moment that book has been published. What I'd love to do is just pick your brain and ask you a series of questions, because I know that a lot of the listeners, are in relationships or have left
Sure.
previous relationships because of financial stress and, communication breakdowns. They don't want to make the same mistakes again, not to say that they
Absolutely.
were necessarily the cause of those mistakes. So when do we know, that sign that it's healthy, or it's the right step, or it's the right time to start talking to our partners, or, someone we're in a relationship with, about money?
It's a great question. I say you want to be talking about money from early on in the relationship, but it's kind of like with children, how you talk to them about certain complex topics, but in a way that's appropriate for their age.
Mm.
Similarly here. So we're talking about money, but in a way that's appropriate for our relationship. So if we're both college students and we're 20 years old, and, even if we end up getting married, it's probably not going to be for 5 to 10 years, then maybe we don't have to talk about, joint bank accounts. But if we're taking vacations together, well, we should at least talk about what our vacation budget is, right? College students, just like adults, often have very different amounts of money to spend, for example. But then I think the older you get, and maybe even more importantly, the more you are looking for a committed partnership, right? The type where you'd be creating a life together,
Yeah. On the
then
same
the
page.
money comes. Exactly. Then it zooms into focus as a need. A lot of the advice you'd read out there, I don't agree with when it says, oh, watch your partner's behavior and look for behaviors that are not great or problem or red flags. And if they're there, like kind of the implication is, get out.
Yeah.
Without judging anybody, I mean, you know yourself better than anyone. And if there's a lot of trauma or history there, and it's just something that you're not willing to negotiate and navigate with this person, of course. But sometimes, like you said, there's no guidebook. Our parents aren't giving us great advice in many cases. If they did it, they just kind of guessed. And so even if somebody looks like they may not have the best financial habits, that doesn't mean you have to get out of the relationship. Just like anything else, right? Any other way that someone might act, you can decide this is too much, it's a deal breaker, whatever. Or you can decide, you know what, let me be open with them about what my concerns are, how I handle this, and see what they have to say, right? I mean, I have clients who have come to me and transformed. I
Mm.
also have clients who, let's say one gentleman, I remember he referred to himself as something like a reckless spender. And, his wife helped him to a point.
Mm.
But when it came to me, it was still an issue of tension because he had mostly learned how to adapt through like force and through shame, right? Not physical force, but kind of like, you need to do better, husband. So he like kind of found a way, but it
Yeah.
wasn't necessarily the most productive way,
Yeah.
right? So, okay, if you see what looks like a red flag, but you feel safe to continue in the relationship, don't give up hope. And that's not an easy space to navigate. I mean, your listeners are people who are working on their money and care about it. So they may be also very enthusiastic and they want their partner to be there with them.
Yeah.
And I'll say this, my clients have all different kinds of ways they manage their money together. And one person could do 90% of the money related roles and responsibilities. That's not necessarily a problem, right? Because we look at the relationship as a whole. It's okay if, you know, I do 90% of money and you do 10%, and then maybe
Yeah.
you do a little more of this other thing, right?
You've got to play to
But
each other's strengths.
exactly. I think the key is, am I willing to communicate with this person and share and be vulnerable and admit, what I'm worried about or what I'm thinking? And then how do they respond, right? Do they show that they can hear my thoughts and feedback and kind of hold space for that and look to try and change things or improve? If so, I mean, no one's a finished product when it comes to anything, let alone money. So, that willingness to listen and learn and improve is, I would say, what to look for most of all.
Look, I completely agree with you. And I love that you said hold the space. It's something that it's a saying that I use a lot in my own personal life, particularly when it comes to supporting people around me. And I agree. It's about education and empowerment. When it comes to getting your partner on the same page, I believe everyone can change. Just because you've had, with someone who's a big spender doesn't necessarily mean that they can't change and you should run for the hills and run away from the problem. If anything, I think problems show up in a relationship to service and to serve our higher good so that we can learn and grow. So it's an opportunity to become a stronger couple, to understand each other on a deeper level, and I firmly believe that when you empower your partner about money and you start building some goals that you're both equally excited and passionate about, it's the glue, and it's an aphrodisiac, and you work together as a team, and you just realize how supportive you are, and you have this newfound appreciation and gratitude, which just flourishes the relationship even further. So for people who are listening to this podcast, you go, I'm in this new relationship and I've noticed this person's a bit of a shopper, I think I might have to break up with them. Please don't. It's not necessarily the case. Like, everyone can change. And also, I believe that not everyone's at that point yet. They say that the teacher appears when you're ready for the lesson. And, we have to respect that sometimes with money, because it can be a big trigger subject, and people do need to wait, sometimes be a bit of patience and go, okay, you've got something going on. I'm going to wait until you're ready, and I'm educate you in the meantime to help nurture that process and hopefully speed it up a bit. But yeah, people can change. And it's sometimes the block, I should say, the brick wall is just not understanding and not being aware, and not being excited.
Right. Absolutely. And, sometimes there's even a brick wall or, something underground supporting that brick wall, right? They may have grown up where money was, let's say, a topic where the parents argued, or where they were dealing with poverty as a child, and that stuck with them. And now money's a scary or uncomfortable topic. So when you approach them and you're all excited and gung ho and, happy go lucky about money, and you have all these ideas, normally we would think, oh, this person, they love me, they care about me, they're going to be excited. Maybe, right? Because if they haven't confronted, dealt with, worked on some of those things, some of the relationship with money that they have, then when you come to them like that, it may be really stressful. It might make them feel anxious. I see all the time clients who are afraid that they are not living up to their partner's expectations of them, when their partner is the one who's like more, oh yeah, let's do this, and let's, passive income and real estate and this and that. And so what I always say, if you're building something with somebody, there is this entity that is the two of you together, right? And how can you have that flourish is always the question. And both parties always contribute, right? So I'm not saying, if your partner is, if your household income is 5,000 a month and your partner is spending 4,500 on shopping or whatever, don't get me wrong. There's obviously a behavior to work on there, right? But it's still, you can always look at yourself and say, what am I doing or not doing? How am I approaching this? Or maybe what's missing from my approach, so that I might actually support them and help them grow along this continuum. And just remember that presumably your own growth didn't happen overnight, right? Either maybe you were taught growing up, or you've been studying this for some time, you've watched a lot of videos and podcasts. And so your partner may have their own timeline as well. And just keep that in mind.
With that topic of, having a partner that's, say, got a money story that's filled with trauma or anxiety or poverty, What's the best way of supporting that partner? If you're someone who's like a get out and, grab life by the horns, how do you respect, honor, like nurture your other half that has those, I guess, challenging money stories?
Yeah. All right. I'm going to give you the audience a couple of cheat codes for this, right? Here's the first one. Don't go straight to trying to talk about numbers or specific habits, because if this is a new topic for you, it's just take my advice, it's not going to go well. Basically, they have no context for why you're talking about this specific thing. If they don't know how much is coming in or where their money's going, then whether to increase or decrease, the restaurant budget, it's almost an arbitrary conversation because they don't know how it fits into the whole, right? So what you want to do is first figure out, okay, why does this matter to me in terms of this relationship? What am I trying to create with this person? And how would having a stronger financial situation and being on the same page, how would that help? And that is what you go and talk to them about. Like, hey, you know what? I love you so much. I am so thrilled with how our relationship is developing. And, I find myself like daydreaming about all the wonderful things we could do together in the future. And, then I got to thinking about how money, of course, ties into everything. And I was wondering if you'd be up for just starting that conversation, starting to get to know how each other looks at money and how we think about it so that we can start working towards teaming up, right? We're better together than we are apart.
I love that approach. I just feel like that's such a heartfelt, meaningful, respectful way of approaching such an emotionally driven topic. That's a fantastic tip. Thank you so much for sharing. When it comes to exploring, your partners and your own values around money, like, for example, my partner Tom, he loves, he loves to go to a beautiful, expensive, extravagant restaurant. Like that's his value system. Whereas mine is actually, I'm happy with like $20 pizza, a bottle of rosé at home. Like I'm such a homebody. How do we discover our own value system around money, and how do we discover our partner's value system around money?
Yeah. I think for our own value system, you've probably got a pretty good sense of it, right? It's what do you find to be worth the money? If you're not sure, you can at least look at your bank statement, your credit card statement, and see where you're spending your money. That'll give you a good start. You might be spending on some things that really aren't that important to you, but at least, you can start getting some ideas. But it's really about that self-reflection. Some people like the journaling or vision boarding. For me, I do best talking it out with somebody else. And this is really then the approach to take with your partner is just ask and listen, right? I don't want to overcomplicate this. You want to find out about how they value money? Ask them questions like, hey, if you had an extra $1,000 or $10,000, what would you spend it on? Right. Or if your salary went up by 50%, what would you want to do that you can't do now? Or what are some important goals for you that, have a relationship to money? Or how do you think about career, and what's the relationship for you as far as like how important is the freedom of having free time versus how much you're making versus how much you learn at your job versus the purpose? Like, do you feel like it's right? And just even listening to how they weigh those factors, it's step one is to listen to the words that they're actually saying, right? And of course, you ask the questions to get them to share. But step two is also to really, more than the specifics, try to get a feel for who they are and understand the underlying thought process, right? Do they think from a really practical perspective about money, or maybe they think practically about some things and other things they're a little more like, pie in the sky, head in the clouds. And just remembering that the likelihood is that there are some aspects of how your partner relates to money that are going to seem very different than how you do.
Mm.
And that's not an accident, right? I mean, when we look at relationships and you follow even like therapists and researchers, they talk about how there's all these ways in which opposites actually do attract, that usually it's an introvert and an extrovert, right? Usually it's
So
someone who might have,
true.
yeah, right. And people who have different attachment styles, if that's something that you're into. There's those differences are a big part of what makes us a good pair and attracts us to each other. And it's actually the same with money, but when there's not a feeling of safety and trust to talk about it, those things feel like a problem. Once we start to have these conversations, I mean, sometimes just a single constructive conversation that has nothing to do with numbers or investments or whatever, where you just talk about, some of your values and priorities and goals around money, that can go a really, really long way. And then over time, you start to see those differences are really complementary. And
Yeah.
now that partner who was reckless, now they're actually the one who makes sure that you pause and smell the coffee and enjoy life and go on an adventure that you don't need to go on and it's expensive, but you probably wouldn't if you were on your own, and you go and make beautiful memories together, right? And then the other way, it's like your partner's not the pain in the butt trying to like restrict you and make your life miserable. Actually, they are able to help ground you and make sure that you can go and have those wonderful adventures and make those memories, but also do it in a way that's thoughtful and intentional. And when you get to that spot, that's a beautiful thing.
It's funny you say that, because if I asked Tom if he won $1,000 tomorrow, what would he do? And he would be like, well, I'd go out to lunch, and then he'd book an expensive restaurant. And for me, I'd be like, well, I'll put that $1,000 towards the home loan because that's going to save us time and lots of money and interest, and it's going to alleviate my financial stress.
Yep.
And as I said, I'm the introvert, Tom's the
Yep.
extrovert,
For sure.
that was definitely something we struggled with earlier in our relationship. But you're so spot on. It's the yin and the yang. So Tom is actually good because he gets me out of the house, socializing
Yep.
more, actually spending more time, with our friends and exploring new places and even different types of food. But then
Yep.
the reciprocal of that is that I then kind of keep him a bit more anchored. It's not all about like going
Love
out to
it.
the best places. It's actually about going to, all the most expensive places or the newest places. It's about going to just really beautiful places in our local community that don't, the local pizza bar or even the burger place or, sushi train, but also honoring that it's also important to make sure we pay off our home loan. It's also and try and pay it off quicker. It's also important that we, that I need to recharge and reset in the security and safety of my own home, and that I really value having in our relationship having less financial stress in our lives, and it goes on to benefit the time that we spend with our children. So I completely agree. It's the yin and the yang. You're both there to serve each other and to have that really healthy balance where you can actually have the best of both worlds. And I actually really love that Tom does that. He likes to spend money that way, because otherwise I can get into a bubble and no one can see me come out the front door. And the same for him. Like his financial situation has dramatically changed, because I'm like, okay, well, hang on. We went out to a nice restaurant, say 3 or 4 weeks ago. Let's just slow it down a bit, and therefore we'll appreciate it more next time we go. The next question I wanted to ask you is, and this is something I come across a lot, and it's where couples are earning different incomes. You might have one partner making like 6 figures and the other partner is making, say, half that. How do you get your partner on the same page to go, hey, I'm not defined by what I earn? Because I feel like one of the most common, I guess, arguments in couples is when you've got someone earning a lot more than the other, but the person earning less, or maybe earning less potentially because they're caring for children or caring for other family members, or because of their situation, their career path that they've chosen is not as financially rewarding. It's obviously rewarding on many other levels beyond money. But how do you deal with that dynamic? Because I feel like that's probably the number one scenario where arguments erupt, because the pressure is quite often put on, or the expectation is put on the lower income earner to maintain the same standard of living, or chip in 50-50, but yet they earn, say, 30% of what the other person's earning.
Yes, this is always a challenging topic. The thoughts I'm going to share will come from the perspective of dealing with a committed couple, right? Because if you're kind of like still feeling things out, right? There's so many different places you might be in your relationship, but I'll keep it to thinking about committed couples, probably living together, maybe married, maybe not, but at that kind of stage of things, right? You have to talk about it. That's it. And be willing to be brave and talk about how it feels and acknowledge your own humanity. For me, it's been really hard to look and be not the primary breadwinner in my household, right? My fiance earns more than I do at this point. And there's reasons why. I could say this, that, and the other thing, but it's not easy, right? As men, we're socialized. It's our job to be the provider. And it's uncomfortable for me to not be at least a 50-50 partner. And, at the moment we do split things that way, right? We do split our joint expenses, but as a small business owner, income ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
And I'm usually looking a few months ahead, but when I look a few months ahead and I'm like, oof, the next few months are, not as great. It might be a little bit difficult. Oh my goodness, the anxiety is there right away. And I just have to own that, right? The fact that I help couples with this all day, every day, it doesn't mean that I'm not a human being at the end of it. And just like everyone listening is, just like you are. Yeah. And so really being willing to acknowledge that stuff, and that invites your partner to also be courageous and open. And, if there are financial power dynamics, my best advice is to name them, to actually say them, right? Hey, there is power dynamic here because I make 30% as much as you do. And it doesn't mean that our relationship doesn't work, but instead of avoiding that, let's actually talk about, given the situation, what feels good for us, right? What are some different ideas we have about how we might be able to manage this and coordinate it? And now, instead of like pushing kind of against the tide, you're kind of going with the flow, right? And you're like, okay, because if your partner makes 100,000 and you make 40, it is what it is. Just pretending it's not there and trying to do something that you can't reasonably do, it's just going to create more anxiety, more stress, more feelings of shame, or that you're not good enough or something. Actually, just talk. Just get it out there, talk about it, and figure out how you can work best with it. But I'll tell you this, there may never be zero discomfort around, especially if there's a large earning gap, whether that's because one's a stay-at-home parent, like you said, or just that's the way their careers look. It may never be 0% uncomfortable. My goal for my clients is not 0% discomfort, no arguments, no tension. Anybody who promises that, I would really be careful, because that's not how human beings are. That's not how relationships are. The question is, how can I learn to catch myself when I'm stuck in a point of view or a narrative or a behavior that's not productive? How, when we get into a repeated unhealthy pattern, how can we get out of it more quickly and then reconnect more deeply? How can we deal with the discrepancies and the challenges in our financial situations in a way that actually makes each of us feel loved, supported, cared for, like a real teammate, because that can actually bring you then closer together, right? And so it's not about perfection. It's about how can we take what we're actually dealing with, right, and find the beauty in that. I don't know if you saw the Everything Everywhere All at Once movie yet, but I just watched it, and it's, I think that's a really big theme of that movie is like things are how they are, but where do you find the meaning and the beauty inside of it? And that might seem kind of out there, but really it's true. Like that you have different perspectives or priorities or incomes, these things are not a problem unless you make them a problem. But you
Yeah.
can actually turn them into an opportunity for you to connect and grow and get closer together and build something even more beautiful. And that's really what I invite everybody to do.
So in the dynamic, for example, where you've got, say, one partner working full-time, earning, say, $120,000 a year, and the other partner is, say, caring for young children at home, or perhaps studying a new course, or taking a sabbatical because they've been made redundant or something like that, and they say their income is down, they're working part-time, working but also caring for young children, and say they're earning, say, $30,000 a year. Now, and obviously being a female and being a mother and working for myself, I obviously have bias here, but the partner that's earning less, how, knowing that, a lot of women in this position feel like they're of less value because they're doing so much unpaid work in the house. They aren't able to earn any more money because, unfortunately, in a lot of countries, it's very hard for women to return back to work at a full-time level or even on a part-time level and be supported with the dynamics of children and school drop-offs and pickups and children getting sick and so forth. Like, how does the partner that's earning less, who's feeling vulnerable, insecure, questioning their self-worth, questioning their value, and feeling that they're just constantly providing on an unpaid level, deal with that insecurity to their partner?
Yeah, I mean, I think step one is acknowledging it and talking about it, right? Like, hey, I'm so grateful for everything you do for our family. And I know that I make less and I also do this important work at home. And, I'm not getting a paycheck for that, but I certainly think that it's still valuable work. And you can even ask them, right? Like, do you agree that the work I'm doing at home is valuable? Right? If they say no, that's indicative of maybe a different sort of problem that you really need to work out as well. Right? The thing about money is that it's interconnected with all these other things. So we can't talk about money and relationships without talking about the historical and current fact that women on average are paid less than men for the same work.
Yeah.
That people of color are paid on average less than white people for the same work.
Yeah.
That women, even in young couples, still do on average well more than 50% of the household domestic emotional labor, as they call it. And those things are not typically paid. The gap could be an education one, as you've referenced before. Maybe your partner never stopped to think about how much it would cost if they, let's say, hired someone else.
Nanny or something like that. That's expensive,
Extremely. But, I think the bigger picture is we are a team and we are trying to create the best life for ourselves as individuals and as well for our family.
Yeah.
Right. And so how are we going to do that? And if you've agreed that one person is going to be a stay-at-home parent, then you've agreed to that, right? Now, I'm not saying that it's easy. And some people, that your partner might be uncomfortable or resistant or defensive if you start saying, well, I don't feel appreciated, this, that, or the other thing. That's why I think sometimes a little bit softer approach of like sharing how you've been feeling about the discrepancy in income, and also the fact that you do all of this stuff that doesn't get paid with a traditional, with currency. You start there and give them space to share their thoughts, right? It's just like, I'm so grateful for the money you bring in. And, I love being a stay-at-home parent, but I've been thinking about it, just feeling a little like unsure of myself because I make so much less. And also I do all this other stuff that maybe doesn't earn a traditional paycheck. But I mean, yeah, I don't know, maybe some assurance, or we can talk about it because I'm feeling kind of less than, and I don't think that's what you want, right? And that's not what I want.
You've filled me up with such beautiful advice and wisdom. I can't thank you enough for coming on in today's podcast. So I think,
my pleasure.
For all the listeners, Adam's advice is gloves off. You don't need to go into, have a huge row or argument or fight with your partner when it comes to money. Dare to expose yourself, dare to be vulnerable, dare to use this as an opportunity to grow closer to your partner, to set down some amazing roots, to dream together, and to set down some exciting short-term goals to work on together, where your relationship is going to be given the opportunity to continue on growing and evolving and flourishing, with everyone obviously having a benefit from that flow-on effect. Now, so Adam, thank you so much. Now, for people who are listening to you right now, they're like, all right, you've got a great approach, you've got some great advice here. How do they get in contact with you if they want to book a one-on-one session with you? Because I can imagine this would be incredibly valuable for couples in all different stages of their relationships before they embark on the money journey, as they're in the middle of it, in the thick of it, especially if you've got kids and they're time poor and need to get their money issues sorted quickly, or even people who, partners, there are ones looking at retiring, the other one can't afford yet to retire. Like, how do people reach out to you?
Yes. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm always grateful to you. You gave me a chance. So always grateful to you for the opportunity to connect and be part of your community. Couplesfinancialcoach.com is my website. And that's where you'd find me everywhere. Is Couples Financial Coach is my handle on all the different social media platforms. But that's really the place to start. If you want to take a quiz to see your couple's money personality type and get a free tool for wherever you're at, it's on my website, couplesfinancialcoach.com/quiz. But that's the best way to connect with me and explore the different opportunities I offer to help you really thrive financially and in your relationship at the same time.
I'm going to do that quiz with Tom tonight when he gets home.
Love it.
All right, Adam, thank you so much for coming on to Sugar Mama's Fireplay podcast. So grateful. And for all the listeners, obviously I will link in the podcast description all of Adam's contact details, so it's easy to get in touch with him. Thank you everyone for listening. If you could leave a rating and review and let us know by commenting, if that's possible, on the platform you're listening to this on, the best bit of advice that you got from this particular podcast. I would greatly appreciate it. All right, everyone, have a fantastic week ahead, and I will see you next Monday on Sugar Mama's Fireplay podcast. I am Hannah Campbell.